Ok, ya estamos grabando. Entonces, bueno, en primer lugar, darles a todo el mundo la bienvenida y darles las gracias por comprar el libro y por comprar la experiencia. Nos estamos muy felices de poder, después de tanto trabajo, haber llegado a este punto, a este momento, que es el conversatorio con Scott. Vamos a hacer una muy breve introducción en la cual les vamos a hacer explicarle un poquito qué es Libros de Guarda y cuál es la idea. Luego Leandro Meniers, que lo veo por aquí ya, quiero que nos hable un poquito de cómo fue el hecho de traducir y el hecho de poder preparar un capítulo especial para el libro. Y finalmente, pues Nacho Curto de Laurus, que también lo veo por ahí, que nos hable un poco de cómo fue el proceso de la colaboración y, bueno, las latitas que ya todos deben tener en sus manos. Yo estoy en Panamá, o sea que conseguí un contrabando y que me llegaran las latas. Ya me las debí, pero bueno, tengo al menos las latas. Entonces, quiero compartirles la pantalla para explicarles brevemente de qué va esta historia, ¿no? Bueno, como les digo, yo soy José Carlos Blanco, yo estoy en Panamá, junto con Aitor Labrador, que es un autor que ha publicado libros sobre cerveza, ha publicado una adaptación o la traducción en español de Beer for Dummies, de cerveza para dummies, y ahora recientemente ha publicado la adaptación al español de Cheese for Dummies, queso para dummies. Entonces, bueno, es un buen amigo mío desde hace muchos años. Y sumando su experiencia en el mundo literario editorial y sumando la experiencia de nuestro tercer socio, que es Diego Maciero, bueno, que es de Editorial Cráter en Brasil y que ya ha publicado 4 títulos sobre materias cerveceras en portugués, pues decidimos arrancar este proyecto ante la necesidad de tener material de calidad y material técnico sobre cerveza en nuestro idioma, ¿no? Hemos estado los tres pendulando en temas relacionados por la cerveza y dedicándonos profesionalmente a temas de la cerveza durante algunos años y, bueno, al final como que decidimos o pensamos que aquí había como un vacío, había como un hueco y que había que llenarlo, ¿no? Entonces nos unimos entre los tres, estamos uno en Brasil, otro en Panamá y otro en España. Entonces, bueno, la idea es que esto sea un proyecto que traspasa fronteras y que nos permita, pues, compartir conocimiento cervecero a ambos lados del Atlántico, Estados Unidos incluso, en cualquier punto donde hay una persona que hable español y le interesa la cerveza, ¿no? Se arrancó con la nueva IPA y vienen más títulos. En principio va a haber algunos o varios que son traducidos, pero también tenemos el interés y la intención de que se publique o publiquemos material propio, libros escritos por autores que escriben en español y que, bueno, que hay de sobra gente que está escribiendo o que tiene el conocimiento, que tiene la capacidad de generar material de muy buena calidad y de alguna manera pues también empezar a apoyar la producción original en nuestro idioma, ¿no? Esto surgió un poco en 2019. Yo estaba en una competición como juez, invitado en la Copa Mitad del Mundo en Ecuador, y estaba también por allí de juez Joe Palmer, autor de Water, autor de How to Brew, cómo elaborar cervezas, y quedamos charlando en algún momento y bueno, yo le dije, pero ¿cómo es posible que How to Brew, que es como que el manual o la guía de elaboración de cerveza casera, que lleva 20 años en inglés, no tiene una edición en español? Y él me explicaba que, pues, que estaba teniendo muchas dificultades y que resultaba difícil y que no era tan fácil conseguir alguien que encarara ese proyecto. Yo en aquel momento, en mi inocencia, dije, esto es incomprensible. Ahora que, bueno, ahora que ya entiendo y que ya sé lo que es publicar un libro, capaz hace más sentido lo que decía John, pero bueno, ya es demasiado tarde para eso. Pero bueno, a partir de esa conversación, pues como que quedó el gusanillo, quedó esa idea rondando y finalmente, pues después de el periodo de la pandemia, que yo creo que muchos de nosotros hemos aprovechado para desarrollar proyectos que siempre estaban ahí como que rondando, pero que nunca teníamos el tiempo o la energía para encarar, pues esto es un proyecto pandémico y ahora mismo pues ya finalmente pues tenemos, o podemos decir que tenemos el primer libro de libros de guarda en la mano, ¿no? Más allá de eso, pues lo que ya todos sabemos, ¿no? O sea, vivimos la cerveza, somos apasionados por la cerveza y queremos que cualquier lector o cualquier aficionado, cualquier persona pueda acceder al material y a la información de mayor calidad sin que el idioma que habla o el idioma que pueda hablar sea un limitante. El primer lanzamiento es la nueva IPA. Ahora mismo estamos aquí con Scott, que nos va a hablar un poquito sobre el libro, sobre cómo se gestó y sobre cómo llegamos al tema de la traducción. Y, como digo, pues próximamente esperamos o tenemos planeado poder ofrecerles varios títulos más interesantes para todos ustedes, no solo en Argentina, que es el primer mercado en el que hemos lanzado, sino vienen lanzamientos próximamente de la nueva IPA, primero en México, en España, y luego pues continuaremos con otros títulos. Tenemos intención de publicar al menos 3 títulos durante el año 2021. Entonces, ahora que ya les di un poco mi visión o lo que es o lo que significa libros de guarda, me gustaría que Leandro nos hable un poquito, le voy a dar la palabra a Leandro para que nos cuente un poquito sobre su experiencia de la traducción y trabajar con Scott y poder pues, participar con un capítulo nuevo y actualizado en el libro. Ya deberías. Ok, hola
Ahí.
Leandro, buenas tardes.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
Muy bien, un gusto tenerte
Buenas
por acá.
tardes. Gracias, un gusto a todos. ¿Se me escucha bien?
Perfectamente.
Buenísimo. Bueno, antes que nada, lo que quería agradecerles por la oportunidad de estar acá y bueno, por haber decidido junto con Diego encarar este proyecto, que creo que como bien decís, es importante la producción de material, quizás en primera instancia traducciones y después material autóctono en español, que es algo que está bastante careciente y digamos, en sus orígenes, Matías de Dos Dingos y yo empezamos con Birratecnia porque justamente observábamos esa misma carencia y empezamos un podcast y porque sentíamos que hacía falta mejorar el nivel técnico local y tenía mucho que ver con la, digamos, la ausencia de bibliografía en español. Y bueno, después Diego se acercó a nosotros para decirnos si nos interesaba participar del proyecto y estaba muy alineado con esos objetivos. Y entonces, bueno, nos sentamos a traducirlo. Ninguno, si lo bien los dos vivimos en el extranjero, yo viví en Inglaterra y Mati vivió muchos años en Australia. El inglés no era una barrera para nosotros, pero fue todo un aprendizaje traducir un libro. Y le pido disculpas si encuentran algunos pequeños errores. Hemos hecho nuestro mejor esfuerzo. Y bueno, después lo interesante fue también que Scott ya había ido actualizando con algunos errores que habían ido surgiendo a lo largo de que la gente lo iba leyendo, algunas cosas que no estaban claras, y entonces se tradujo desde un manuscrito un poco ya mejorado con respecto a la versión en inglés. Además, él estuvo dispuesto a articular un nuevo capítulo que es como una especie de qué sucedió en el ámbito científico vinculado con el lúpulo y con las IPAs y con todo esto que nos interesa a todos. Y entonces también pudimos incluir ese capítulo. Y además, con Mati desde Birratecnia, el año pasado hicimos un trabajo experimental que publicamos en el MBAA sobre biotransformación, aplicado, bien aplicado al mundo cervecero, y no tan académico, sino un poco más práctico, y entonces desde ahí que decidimos que estaba bueno agregar un apéndice al libro tratando específicamente ese tema desde la visión que Matías y yo compartimos de la investigación, intentándolo bajar un poco más al ámbito práctico, que fue interesante sentarse a escribir un capítulo para un libro, la verdad una linda oportunidad. Y bueno, y después Nacho desde Laurus, yo desde Placebo y Mati de Dos Dingos, hicimos 2 cervezas distintas colaborativas con Scott, cada uno encaramos intentando hacer con cosas de research de distintas, que estuvo bueno porque los dos agarramos como ramas distintas que explorar. Nosotros fuimos por el lado de los tioles y por el lado de una investigación de Yakima Chief, de YCH, de lo que es Survivables, que en el apéndice, en el capítulo nuevo, Scott habla un poco, que es algo que salió hace poquito el año pasado. Y bueno, entonces nada, decidimos hacer una birra intentando llevar a la práctica esos conceptos. Y bueno, espero que la hayan disfrutado o la vayan a disfrutar. Así que sin más, le dejo la palabra a Nacho para que cuente, ¿no?, un poco sobre su experiencia haciendo la colaborativa a distancia. Nosotros hicimos una gigantografía de Scott para no sentirnos tan solo en la fábrica cuando vino, cuando no pudo venir por la pandemia, pero bueno, la pandemia permitió encarar proyectos, lo triste es que no permitió vernos. Así que bueno.
Bueno, Leo, gracias. Buenas, ¿cómo andan? Hi, Scott. Sorry for the Spanish for this little while. But the idea was to have Spanish people listening. Bueno, como dice Leo, como dice José también, y agradecidos a todo el equipo de hablar. Más allá del cassette casi futbolístico, la verdad que yo estoy muy agradecido, estamos todos acá del lado de Laurus muy agradecidos de participar en este proyecto. Y creemos que lo que dice, el objetivo que tiene Libros de Guarda, la verdad que tiene un potencial grande y que va a ayudar mucho. Hacer una colaborativa a distancia fue todo un desafío. Para nosotros fue nuestra primera colaborativa a distancia. Por suerte no nuestra primera colaborativa internacional, porque tenemos buenos amigos y amigas que nos han venido a visitar, pero sí a distancia. Y lo que buscamos en la Unit Conversion, cuyo nombre fue una nerdeada por tanto mail y vuelta con Scott y tanta videollamada transformando de sistema métrico a sistema imperial o británico, como le quieran decir. Nada, fue buscar una birra así con ese concepto de NEIPA que tal vez, charlando un poco con Scott, nos dimos cuenta que lo tenemos más acá, arraigado de esa manera que en Estados Unidos mismo, ¿no? Mucha turbidez, esa turbidez casi jugo de frutas y ese cuerpo alto, que no digo que no esté en el estilo en Estados Unidos o en esta familia de birras, sino que tal vez acá lo tenemos incluso como más extremo, ¿no? Y la idea de usar Sac Trois, de hecho yo la leí por primera vez del socio y amigo de Scott, de Michael Tonsmeyer, de The Malformationist, en lo que en su momento se llamaba como Brett IPA, ¿no? En la época que el Sac Trois todavía estaba ahí en el límite del ADN entre una Saccharomyces y una Brettanomyces. Y después el resto del laburo fue un poco usar la experiencia de Scott en cargas altas en Whirlpool. En Whirlpool a un poco más baja temperatura. Y un dry hop sobre el final a temperatura intermedia, ¿no? Los dry hop de esa NEIPA que ya habrán probado o que tal vez probarán, están hechos todos entre 13 y 14 grados, ¿no? En fermentación. Bueno, nada, no los quiero aburrir mucho más porque la idea acá que todo el mundo está es para escucharlo a Scott, así que nada, muy contentos de haber participado en este proyecto, de haber hecho esa birra, estamos muy contentos con el resultado realmente y ojalá sea la primera de varias NEIPAs, porque de hecho es nuestra primera NEIPA, como pusimos en la etiqueta, nos dimos el lujo de hacer nuestras primeras NEIPA con Scott. Gracias por la palabra, José, Leo. Lean, perdón.
Bueno, pues la verdad es que yo tuve la fortuna, como les digo, de conseguir las 2 cervezas o conseguir que me contrabandearan las 2 cervezas hasta Panamá. Me parecen 2 cervezotas, ambas, cada una con sus diferencias y cada una con sus peculiaridades, pero 2 cervezas súper interesantes, súper complejas, con una presencia de lúpulo impresionante. Me impactó mucho el aroma, sobre todo de la colaboración con Dos Dingos y Placebo, y el aspecto, la turbidez de la cerveza de Laurus era impresionante, ¿no? Yo creo que que esto resume bien lo que quiere o conseguir el libro, que es invitar a los cerveceros a experimentar y a probar cosas nuevas y conseguir elaborar este tipo de cervezas que son tan interesantes y son tan gustadas ahora. Y creo que estos, de hecho, son dos muy buenos ejemplos de los conocimientos del libro aplicados a la práctica. Entonces, si les parece, yo creo que deberíamos o podríamos empezar ya con la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Como les digo, si están en el canal en español, van a poder escuchar a Scott, la traducción de Carlos Estrada al español. Entonces, es conveniente además que hagan silencio en el audio original. Cuando entran en el botón de interpretación, pueden seleccionar el canal de español o inglés y además pueden silenciar o mutear el audio original, con lo cual van a escuchar mucho mejor la traducción. Scott, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. After this introduction, we are going to start with the Q&A. Actually, I would like to start asking you about how did you end up writing a book about hops?
I never intended to write a book, that's for sure. So I started blogging about beer mostly through inspiration from my now business. Blogging at the time. And you know, at the time I was just brewing batches and putting up my recipe and results, and had it more as like a space where I could keep my ideas out there, and then maybe if I learned something, somebody else might learn something. But then the more I brewed and the more I started writing about beer, and I got more and more into it, like probably everyone on this call right now. You just find yourself a little obsessed with it. And so, you know, it wasn't until I started to stumble across academic papers, that's where I like really started to zero in on brewing hoppy. Up to that point, I was just looking at you know, random websites, other blog forums, and that's where I was getting all my information. And that was when I held the first research paper. I was just amazed because you know you just felt a little obsessed with it until I started to stumble across actual compounds in the beer. And for me, it was just like, wow, I didn't even know this stuff existed. And I just started reading more and more of these studies, and the more studies I started to collect, I think it was that I had tucked away. That's when I realized the information, and that was, you know, that we're tasting them, and from piecing it together. But so it was a slow. I just started reading more and more of these things, but it was, you know, I'm just glad there was enough people willing to. I was nervous no one would want to buy a real science heavy book about brewing one style and one style only. So I was, I've been pretty happy with
realmente estoy bastante feliz con
the reaction so far. So that's a long-winded answer to say it just kind of was a slow progression from blogging to writing a book.
No, that's great. It's quite different. Maybe some things that one learns along the way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I would also like to ask, what are your impressions? What is your opinion about being able to publish the new IPA in Spanish, and therefore being able to reach several million brewers or several million potential readers that doesn't speak English or are not able to speak English?
Honestly, I think it's pretty awesome. I was fine in English, let alone in other languages. And so, I was approached to at least look into doing this in Spanish. My immediate reaction was like, yeah, I mean, that would be awesome. There's studies that sometimes aren't in English that are done in other countries that I can't read, and I find that super frustrating. So I can see how, I'm just glad that this happened, and I think it's exciting that it can reach this many more people, and it in some ways I feel like it puts the pressure on me to make sure what I'm writing is good, if that means people are going to keep reading it. So but yeah, I'm pumped.
Okay, have you ever been to Argentina?
I have not been to Argentina. I was hoping to maybe towards the end of last year, but obviously that kind of nobody could do anything. So hopefully somewhat soon I'll be able to make the trip.
I've been told that you were invited to the Somos Cerveceros 2020 festival at the end of 2020, but I imagine that it was impossible to travel during the high problematic pandemic season.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bummer when it's exciting to get invited to those types of events, and it's kind of humbling to actually get invited. And then, of course, it's a bummer that, my travel plans were canceled, but honestly, that happened to everyone. So I don't feel too sorry for myself.
Okay. And what do you feel about the book in Argentina, or do you have any expectation? What is your opinion about? I can tell you that the reception has been great. Actually, we have already sold half the books we have printed, and Nacho can tell you that because he's the one that put every single book into the little box. So he knows for sure how many books we have sold. So they are being a big success.
Well, that's awesome. That's great to hear. It almost feels like I don't even know what's happening over there, and so it's great to hear that some of the books are being sold, and I guess more importantly, the people that bought it, like everyone on this call, thank you for getting a copy. I hope you were enjoying it, and at least learning a few things, or at the very least maybe inspired to try a few new process tweaks or recipe ingredient changes. And so I didn't really have any expectations to how well the book would go over there, but that's for the short time it's been available, that's great to hear. And thank you for packing them all in those tiny boxes one at a time.
Okay, getting a little bit into the hops and the IPAs and the beer, I would like to ask you about your favorite hops. Which varieties do you use for bittering? Which varieties do you use for flavor and aroma? And basically, what would you use in an American IPA, for example?
It's a good question. I could probably talk way too long about some of my favorite hops. When it comes down to bittering hops, I think the old knowledge was, it really doesn't matter what hops you're putting into your beer at 60 minutes or 90 minutes if you're doing like a Pilsner boil, or even 30 minutes, because all those compounds are going to volatilize out. But I mean, there's research that has changed my mind on how some of those varietals that you use as bittering can actually have an impact down the road.
Se ha visto que los lúpulos de amargor pueden tener un impacto aguas abajo.
We brew at Sapwood. Right now, I had to sneak away. This is our new suite right here that we're building out, so it's the only quiet place to be. That's why it looks kind of weird to me. But at Sapwood, you know, unless it's not, you know, like the hazy IPA, will of course bitter like lagers and everything like that. But when it comes to, you know, IPAs, we're typically doing just super heavy whirlpool additions and then mash hopping. So we don't do a lot of bittering hops, but if we do, I like to look at hops that are high in the polyfunctional thiol 3MH, just because research has shown that the 3MH thiol, which is a grapefruit leaning thiol, can actually increase during the boil. So in my mind, if I'm using a hop that's going to be in the boil for 60 minutes and a high in 3MH and maybe possibly during the boil it's going to keep going up in 3MH, that's one that I would like to bitter with. So that would be something like you know, like a Pato or something like a Cascade or a Columbus Nugget. You know, those 3MH heavy hops that I would tend to would like to bitter with. When it comes down to the whirlpool, that's, you know, one of the areas we experiment the most with. At heavy hop, the brewery is just changing how many different hop varieties we will throw into the whirlpool, because a high inflation, sometimes when you throw in, you know, a bunch of hops that, you know, flame out, and when it comes down to tasting the beer before dry hopping it, so after fermentation, you really don't taste or smell any of those hop-derived compounds that you added to the whirlpool. And for us, it really seems, you know, variety. The areas we experiment the most with at the brewery is just stick around better than others. And so those are the ones that we are, you know, still trying to figure out and play with more. And that's, you know, one of the really don't taste, you know, one of the new chapters in the book, the new chapter in the book mentions this a little bit, which is the and for us, the hops. And so those are the ones that are extremely high in a collection of the compounds that we know are being tested in finished beer. And so these are hops high in a collection of thiols and monoterpene alcohols and hop-derived esters. And so those are the ones we're playing with the most in the whirlpool.
Okay.
So I wasn't sure if you were going to say something else there.
No, well, I was actually going to ask you a little bit about how, maybe that's a complex question, but how these bittering hops can end up giving you some flavor profile or some aroma profile on the finished beer.
Yeah, there's certain oxidation process that happens during the boil, and then some of this is covered early in the book. But you know, some of these typically more noble hop varieties can when used in the boil can lead to, you know, the original compounds change into oxidative states, and they can become more woody and herbal. And this is more of the kettle hop aroma, which is the, you know, kettle hop is what's been coined for that term. So those are, you know, hops that I like with beers, just because, you know, you're going for citrus flavors, tropical flavors, and so any bit of like a woody or you know, spicy type aroma from hops I like to try to avoid. Just, you know, the competing flavor for that style. So partly out, you know, some of those bittering hops can actually, at least the science implies, can have an impact on your flavor profile. So that's why, you know, choosing some of your bittering hops wisely can be smart. But honestly, another good option for just straight up bittering additions is using extracts, which we'll do a little bit here at the brewery, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that if you're interested.
Yeah, sure. How about the humulene, especially when you're brewing a New England IPA or a hazy IPA?
Yeah, what was the question? I'm sorry.
How about the amounts of humulene that you need when you're brewing a New England or a hazy IPA?
Cumulum?
Maybe I'm not saying the word right. Humulan?
Yeah. When it comes down to like bittering hops or hops like that, I don't pay a particularly close attention to that particular compound. Maybe I should, but that is, if I'm not mistaken, that is one of those that can be. I'd have to double check on this what I actually researched on that, but that might be one of the compounds that can be oxidized into those more woody characters. But that's not something I look at a lot now, and mostly it's just because I've moved away from those varietals.
Okay. So you would basically avoid that kind of hops?
Say that again?
That you would basically try to avoid those varieties?
Yeah, for bittering, I think. Yeah, it's more like 3MH heavy hops, using extracts for bittering. Sometimes I'm using leftover, dry hops for bittering. I'm just, whatever is going to get me my IBUs, but not have that, woody, more, spice character.
Okay, and you're talking a bit about using extracts. I understand that you're referring to use extracts for their alpha acid content.
Yeah, so we started using, if we're doing something like Imperial Stout where you just need bitterness, we'll just use pretty standard, isomerized alpha acid or alpha acid bittering extract. But for hazy IPAs, we found that we can use some more of the varietal specific extracts. So that means extracts that are made from just Mosaic or just Citra. And because the extracts, are so efficient at getting into the beer, they can actually you can increase your IBUs, but you can also increase the amount of compounds and the type of compounds, I think, that get into your beer. So we like to use some of those more specific extracts. One of my favorites so far is the Incognito extract, particularly the Mosaic one. I think that's pretty great. So we'll load that up in the whirlpool after we chill or during the chill, and we'll use that on top of using pellet hops. It's that combination of two things to really push that complexity and push the amount of compounds we're after into the fermenter. And I would say that I think a lot of people are moving, in my opinion, too far away from being worried about having too many IBUs in an IPA. I really think that the amount of dry hopping you throw up to some of these, the high rates that they're getting, if there's not enough of that hot side bitterness and hot side flavor that really supports the dry hopping, I think that can lead to kind of a flabby, almost, a green vegetal taste where it's not supported with that hot side saturated flavor. So that's one area where I think some of those hop extracts can really play a positive role in beefing up the flavor aspect of a hoppy beer, and not just relying so much on the aroma aspect from the cold side dry hopping.
Okay, we are they're asking what proportion or what amount of extract would you recommend to use?
So let's see. I can just think about we brewed an IPA yesterday, and I'm sorry. We can write down these numbers and Google the translated amounts, but so we did like 1 liter of extract, Mosaic extract, in a 10-barrel batch, and so
10 barrel is around 1,200 liters.
1,200 liters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we also threw in about 22 pounds of hops in the whirlpool with the extract. So, you know, I'm not sure what that exact ratio is. It's probably a lot higher than a lot of breweries will go in terms of hot side hops. But again, there's a pullback of IBUs from dry hopping. You're actually the act of dry hopping itself, the green vegetal material as it like falls through your beer is you know, stripping out some of that hot side, isomerized alpha acids. And so that's, you know, one reason why I'm not afraid to if I'm going to be dry hopping pretty heavily, to also, you know, put quite a few hop end extracts into the whirlpool. So I'm sorry, I don't know how many. I can Google 22 pounds and see about what that is.
That's 10 kilos. So you are using 1 liter extract and 10 kilos of pellets in a 1200 liter batch, basically.
Yeah, you're a smart man.
We are used to working both units, so it's kind of automatic. In one of the chapters of the book, you talk about how the grain bill, how the grain grist can have an influence or can affect the hop profile of the beer. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is, you know, there was, the name of the malt is escaping me that I wrote in there. They actually could have some of these fruitier compounds in the malt itself. What's really interesting to me now, even since writing the book, is more research into again the thiol 3MH, which again is the grapefruit sort of tasting thiol. Grains can be pretty high in 3MH, which is surprising that you get a compound like that from malt that can, you know, have such a positive impact. You know, just step back. You know, thiols are they're very small in hops themselves. Like the amount of the total oil of thiols is really small, but the trick is the threshold for those to actually come across so you can taste and smell them is pretty low.
En términos de percepción es muy bajo. Por lo tanto, no necesitas tantos tioles.
3MH is just going to help you get over that threshold, especially when combined with hops that can, you know, layer on top of that. And what's really interesting to me is I've been talking to some of the local, well, they're not really local, they're on this other side of the country, but they're in the US, other yeast labs that are looking at which base grains, which brands might have even more of the 3MH that could push some of those fruity aromatic qualities. And interesting enough, how certain yeast strains, especially like wine strains that are high bioconverters, might be able to do more with those grain-related thiols than you know, the typical ale strains. And the next thing I'm going to be spending some time testing and experimenting with is upping my mash hop rates quite a bit, like almost like whirlpool rates. So I'm not telling anyone else to do this yet, but I'm going to start practicing with it and experimenting with it. And this is just because, you know, some of the yeast lab technicians that I've been speaking with have found that, you know, those enzymes that are capable of, you know, breaking down your starch into fermentable sugars in your mash might also be able to break down and free up some of the fruity compounds in hops. And so if you can cleave those in the mash and from the grains and get those into the fermenter with a yeast strain that's capable of even bioconverting those even more, that's kind of exciting. But that's a new area of research and probably some writing for me. But
I think I'm not hearing you. I think I lost you. No, I'm not sure about everyone else.
Oh, can you hear me?
Now you hear you. Now I hear you.
I'm not sure where I cut off on you on that answer.
Well, I think you were about to finish, so just the last sentence, so we're good.
Yeah, I was just saying that I'm gonna, do some more research into which enzymes from the mash might be able to help free some of the bound compounds in hops, and so upping my mash hop rates. Maybe even trying to mash it at temperatures that the enzymes that you can buy commercially can survive at, and so you can use some of those in the mash. But really just trying to push those fruity compounds as much as possible. So like layering your chances of getting those into the fermenter for yeast to do their thing with. So that's just a new kind of interesting area that I'm going to look into, and maybe I'll be proven to be an idiot on it, but we'll see.
I think we lost you again.
Oh, can you hear me?
No,
I can hear you good.
No, great. No, great. In the book, there's a big chapter, an important chapter. It's about dry hopping. I think there's a lot of information there about this specific type of hopping procedure. And one of the questions we're receiving is people asking about the ideal or the preferred temperatures to perform the dry hop. How about the colder dry hops versus the warmer ones?
Yeah, it's a timely question too, because I've just been asked by John Palmer to write like a dry hopping best practices guide for the MBAA, and so I've been thinking a lot about dry hopping and different methods and temperatures and amounts and all that kind of stuff. I'm still kind of convinced, or the research has me convinced, that you should at the very least experiment with cooler dry hopping temperatures. And so this would be, not super cold, but definitely a little colder than the primary fermentation was at. So if you're, again, I apologize. So like usually I'm at dry hopping at like 58 degrees Fahrenheit or 56 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where I would start. I can actually just probably look that up really quick here. So.
Okay, let me check that one.
So that's about 13 degrees Celsius. So that's 13 degrees Celsius is where I'm usually starting our dry hop. So let fermentation completely finish, and then we'll drop the tank to 13 degrees Celsius, which for a day or two allows that yeast to settle out, and that's where we'll harvest the yeast if we're going to. If not, we'll just drop all the yeast out of the tank, and then dry hop. There's a lot of reasons. Hop creep is becoming a bigger issue for a lot of breweries, especially if your beers are packaged in a can and maybe not kept cold the entire time until the consumer gets it. And so there's a couple different schools of thought on how to deal with hop creep, but for us at Sapwood, it's really worked out well for us to dry hop cold. These cooler temperatures, the enzymes that are responsible for freeing up some of these dextrins and making them fermentable, they're not as active at the colder temperature. So that's one reason why we like to dry hop cooler. There's other added perks too. I think you're still getting extraction at these cooler temperatures. In fact, even colder, there's been studies that have shown that you still get extraction at even almost the as fast of a time period. So you're still getting extraction of the fruity compounds you're after, and a benefit might even be some of the more green, resinous characters in hops like the myrcene switch, some people like, but I think can kind of be a little distracting. The cooler you dry hop, the less of the extraction of those compounds. So myrcene, you'll actually extract a little more at warmer temperatures. You'll actually extract more polyphenols at warmer temperatures. Polyphenols are not necessarily a bad thing, but with so many hops being thrown at IPAs, I think that can really create a mouthfeel that's kind of vegetal and astringent and not something that it's just harder to drink it, in my opinion. So cooler temperatures helps with those. Cooler dry hopping has also been found to help with head retention. So the alpha acids that are responsible for improving foam stability are actually work a little better at colder temperatures at doing that. So another perk of colder dry hopping. And the only thing I'll have to say is like the colder you go, I think the more important it is to agitate your tank or agitate the vessel to get those hops to go back in suspension. If you're dry hopping warmer, I think the hops naturally stay in suspension a little more, but the colder you go, those hops tend to drop out. Just dropping it to 13C is enough to get your yeast to drop out of a tank. And so I think at the same time that's probably cold enough to encourage some hops to drop out. So we do we've tried recirculating dry hops before to try to going in and out of your tank through a pump back into your vessel to try to recirculate the hops, but it just seems like it's recirculating the beer that's like in that area. It's not necessarily getting everything in. There's hops kind of behind, underneath the vessel or the pump, depending on where you do it. And I'm worried about oxidation doing that as well. And other brewers have complained that they get more of a greener, astringent taste when they recirculate their dry hops. So we've moved to burping through the bottom of the cone about once a day for about 2 or 3 days. And so we'll do that at about 30 PSI. And we found that, quick bursts, so you just opening it and closing it, doesn't do as much as just leaving it open. So leaving the valve open for about up to a minute, sometimes just letting that go through with a decent amount of head pressure on top. So, the less head pressure, the more you burp through, you're not going to have as much CO2 want to come out of solution. So we're still always experimenting with this. We do one thing that we call like our mega burp. So we'll drop the head pressure to like 1 PSI and then blast at 30 from the bottom. And that's low enough head pressure where the CO2 wants to come out of solution and just rushes everything up to the top of the tank. So all of your hops really get up into the beer. But then you're worried that you might be losing some volatiles to that head space. And so it's, it's kind of what makes you more comfortable, but we'll do that sometimes if we do a huge dry hop charge at once. So we'll dry hop, we'll wait about 8 hours or so and let those hops suck up the beer and kind of settle out. And then we'll do the first burp, and we'll do that for about 3 days. So three burps total. And part of the reason is the shorter duration you have those dry hops on your beer, that helps with hop creep too. So the longer those hops sit, the more those enzymes have a chance to kind of take hold. And so we'll drop them out after 3 days and either dry hop again or start crashing the beer to serving temperature. So I guess that's a long question or a long answer on dry hopping, but that we found the most success with.
Mm-hmm. And asking the same question the other way around, how low in temperature would you go?
So we have gone as low as 4 degrees Celsius. When we've gone that low, we didn't seem to get the extraction we were looking for. However, we probably weren't doing as good of a job at burping our tanks then. So I do think if you're going to go as low as that, I think it's even more important to agitate your tanks, maybe even more than once a day. just to help them get back into the beer and extract. But you know, it just kind of follows the natural lifespan of your beer. You know, you dry hop or you ferment a little warmer, and then you just slowly start crashing it, dry hop, harvest yeast, crash it again to get the yeast out, and then just keep it cold. You know, I kind of like that idea versus, you know, going up and down with it too. So, so the colder you can go earlier, I guess you could probably speed up some of your grain to glass time. But again, I just think agitating those hops and getting them back into solution is important, especially the colder you dry hop.
Okay. How about the trop, the hop trop that actually gets into the fermenter? How can that trop give us some trouble with the flavors and the aroma of the beer?
Yeah, trop from the hot side, from your kettle. You know, that gets in your beer. You know, and some studies suggest it helps yeast growth. You have trub in there, but it can also, you know, trub will strip out, you know, hop compounds, and so as well as yeast can. So we do our best just to avoid getting any trub into the fermenter at all. For us, it's worked out really well. We do, when we whirlpool our hops, we generally, if we're doing a chilled whirlpool, we'll let them go for about a half an hour, and then we'll do a 20-minute rest after that. Just gives the hops enough time to settle out. And then we have a pickup arm in our kettle that actually pulls, you know, from the side, not from the center, and we'll pull from the side, and that's, you know, does a pretty good job of getting just clean wort into the fermenter and having the hops and trub kind of in a nice cone in the center.
Okay, and how can the hops you add during the dry hop have an influence on the bitterness of your beer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mentioned earlier that, you know, dry hopping can isomerize alpha acids, but at the same time, they are replacing those with another hop acid called humulones. So humulones are another bittering acid, just like an alpha acid is, but the difference is they're extremely polar. So they will get into your beer very easily at a high extraction efficiency. And they are about 66% as bitter as an isomerized alpha acid. So, you know, if you're dry hopping like crazy, you're stripping out some hot side bitterness, but you're replacing it with a less bitterness acid. So not every bittering acid in a hop is necessarily the same in terms of its sensory bitterness profile. So I mean, you can get bitterness from dry hopping. That's, you know, something that wasn't common to think, you know, even 5 years ago, but it's definitely the case. But again, I'll stress that, and, you know, this is kind of just more my opinion. If you have too many of these humulones in your beer from dry hopping, combined with a lot of polyphenols, if you don't have enough of that hot side supporting bitterness and you know, getting some more of those hot side flavors into your beer, it can really be vegetal and kind of hard to drink. So that's, I think that replacement of cold side bittering acids with hot side is an important give and take. If it's just too much from the cold side, it's just a little too green in my opinion. So that's why I definitely like to up those rates on the hot side a little bit.
Well, and for sure, the IBU calculators are not ready for those cold side bitterness.
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, you know, the IBU number is still extremely helpful in terms of repeatability. So, you know, if you're if if you're on your system, if you brew a double IPA at 100 IBUs, is what Beersmith or whatever you use calculates. And it tastes good to you, that's a bitterness level you want to target. That's where IBU numbers, I think, are extremely helpful. In fact, we still use them in that exact way. But because the IBU test itself only looks for a total amount of bittering units, bittering acids, it doesn't actually distinguish which acids they are. That's why it's not as helpful, because again, not every hop dry bittering acid is as sensory bitterness as another, if that makes sense. So it's a useful number, but until not all of us in our breweries have the machinery to test the HPLC units to test what acids are in there. So until then, it's more of a take good notes, figure out where your IBUs are from the hop side calculations, and then know how much you're dry hopping, and you can kind of play with your results.
Okay, it's more than a comparative value, no? Know the number and compare it with your flavor profile or your target, and if your target and your flavor profile is good, that's a good number.
Yep, exactly. And you can always send I don't know if there's labs close to everyone in Argentina, but we can always send a final product to a lab and see where your actual tested IBUs are. You can do that a few times too, and see where you're at after you get a sense of the actual bitterness number versus what your recipe development software calculates. So that's something you can always try just more out of curiosity for yourself. But
okay, you talk a little bit about hop creep. I think now that many of the brewers had to change from kegs in their tap room or in the bars, and because of the pandemic and the necessity to sell off-premises beers, they have to switch or change quickly to packaging, canning or bottling. So I think hop creep is more relevant now with the pandemic than ever. What are the advices you can give the brewers to try to reduce or minimize the effect of the hop creep in their beers?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I'm sure our brewery isn't any different than a lot of yours. I mean, we've had to move to canning pretty much everything, and before we weren't canning at all. And so it's definitely an issue that we worry about too. I think there's, as far as I know, there's really two schools of thought on how to deal with hop creep. One is to try to keep those enzymes that are responsible for freeing up those fermentable sugars as low as possible. And the way to do that is essentially by kind of how I was explaining earlier. It's the colder dry hops, it's the shorter durations. Those are good routes to go. The other way that you can attempt to try to deal with hop creep is to let it happen. So let it happen in your tank. There's breweries, I just talked to Great Notion brewery, and that's actually in the book, and I just talked to them about their process on hop creep for the article I'm working on. And essentially what they do is they do the opposite of that. So they dry hop warm. So they're dry hopping towards the end of fermentation, and so they're probably more like 21 degrees Celsius. 21 degrees Celsius, the same way we are through the bottom of their tank. But they're doing it for about a week. So they're leaving those hops in there for a long time. They're doing it warm. Every time they burp, whatever yeast is in that still in the beer is being pushed up and almost encouraged to do its thing. You know, just get done with it. Like free up those sugars now, and so it happens in the stainless steel tank and not in the packaged beer. And so that works for them, and that process works for a lot of other breweries here. So I think it's either you're trying to reduce those enzymes from happening with a short, cold, dry hopping, or you're just letting it happen or encouraging it to happen with about a week warm. So, you know, either way, as long as you're aware of it and trying your best to avoid it, I think. Luckily, we haven't had any issues with our current setup, so hopefully that gives some of you some confidence.
Bueno, solo un pequeño recordatorio de que todo aquel que quiera hacer alguna pregunta puede incluirla en el chat y las iremos planteando a Scott. Entonces, bueno, no sean tímidos, ya se me están acabando las preguntas a mí, o sea que me gustaría que pudieran intervenir un poquito más y pudieran ir planteando las dudas que le van surgiendo. Okay, Scott, we continue. One of the big new things about the hop and the hoppy beers, the new kid on the block, everybody's talking about this biotransformation. Everybody wants to get on board of that and try to use their hops during active fermentation in order to get some interesting, nice tropical flavors. Can you talk a little bit about that? What do we know, what we don't know? Because it's not that much, I think. It's kind of still some mystery about biotransformation.
Yeah, I think biotransformation is one of the more frustrating things for me to study and experiment with, because it's difficult to know what you're doing is actually paying off or not. Essentially, we do know that most of the yeast strains, the ale strains that we're using for fermentation is capable of bioconverting certain monoterpene alcohols. So, you know, your geraniol going to beta-citronellol, for example, that's something that is happening from ale strains. In terms of what I'm more interested is like the thiol conversion, because thiols are just so much more potent. They have so much more of an opportunity to have an impact on, in my opinion, a positive impact on hoppy beers. I really want to find a way to release these bound thiols as well as have some of them converted and be converted to 3-MHA, which is a passion fruit like thiol. And so, you know, you need certain enzymes to release these. So when it comes to
para lograr esto. Entonces, cuando hablamos de
monoterpene alcohols, you know, that's beta glucosidase is the enzyme that actually frees up these compounds, which is not usually something that's in ale strains that we know right now. But you can pitch with like a wine strain that is a high producer of beta glucosidase, for example. But, you know, it's those monoterpene alcohols, I think they can definitely add to complexity in your beer. They're very important to have in there. But I think the focus should be more on freeing the thiols than the monoterpene alcohols, just because they have just so much more opportunity to have an impact. But that's a different enzyme. So to release bound thiols is beta-lase, which is an enzyme, again, that's not found in you know, as a producer in most of our ale strains. So there's a couple schools of thought on how you can kind of deal with this. One is to buy commercial enzymes that you can put into your beer. So you just literally buy these enzymes and you mix them with a little water and you can add them to your beer at like fermentation. I've tried this with both of the enzymes with some success, and you know, for me, I think the benefit has been they don't produce beers that it's like extremely more potent, but they seem to have more shelf life. it just seems like they keep their hoppy character a little longer than when we don't use them. But you know, it's such a tricky thing, because if you want to do it without pitching enzymes, say you use a wine strain that is very high producer in beta-lase, which is the one that releases thiols. Adding a wine strain to your beer has other impacts. Wine strains can produce very phenolic flavors, and so whatever bioconverting is being done by the wine yeast due to its active enzyme, it might just be covered up by, you know, the other flavor compounds that come from that yeast. So it's actually interesting that I think next week or the week after, I'll be getting another yeast strain from Omega Labs, which they are doing some genetically modifying of strains. So they're actually adding in, so like one of the most popular hazy IPA strains is London Ale 3, right? London Ale 3, their strain, they found, does not have the gene responsible for bioconverting thiols. So that gene is called the IR7 gene, to get super technical. So the IR7 gene wasn't found in London Ale 3. And so London Ale 3 itself is probably not doing any bioconverting of thiols. But what they've actually done is they've taken the gene from another yeast strain that has it, put it into London Ale 3, and then over expressed it, makes it even more active. And so I think some of the more genetically modified yeast strains might be where we're going to have our biggest bang for our buck, because they can really target that. But they can also do things like, you know, combine a wine yeast and a London Ale 3 into one strain, but they can remove the phenolic gene from it. So it doesn't get phenolic flavors, but it actually is adding that gene that's responsible for bioconverting. So the biotransformation is such a huge topic with so many questions, and I think we still have so much research and testing to do on it. But I am definitely encouraged by how much we seem to be learning subject, and it's still one that I get excited to play with the most and test with. So again, I feel like I'm not actually answering the question, but more just talking about the topics as a whole. So.
Well, we would actually need a couple of days to get to the bottom of biotransformation.
Yeah, exactly.
You've been talking about tiles that need to be converted by the action of the yeast, but can you talk a little bit about some of the other tiles that they give directly flavor and aroma to the beer?
Yeah, so really the main, there's three main tiles that are looked at, and you know, I mentioned them. So it's the 3MH, the 3MHA, and 4MMP is the other big tile that can have like a, you know, the research always says like a blackcurrant like flavor. There's also another one, I believe it's 3S4MP, which is a tile that like some of the New Zealand hops are really high in, like Nelson Sauvin. Mm-hmm. So those are pretty much like the four main tiles that get researched and talked about. And you know, this is not something that is unique just to beer. I mean, these are the same tiles that the wine industry has been looking at and testing for years. In fact, the wine industry has been looking at trying to figure out how to bioconvert these much long before, you know, hop heads like us have been dealing with it. So yeah, I mean, you know, 4MMP, I think that's, you know, Mosaic is a good example of that compound. That's a hop that's high in that. Unlike 3MHA, which is a hop, a tile that can actually increase in the boil, 4MMP will actually decrease. And so that's more of a cold side tile that you can add, you know, for dry hopping to try to get into your beer. And if you're going to whirlpool with it, probably even more reason to drop your temperature before adding the hops if that's one of the files you're after. So those basically the four main files. It is interesting though that there's all these compounds are important to each other. It's they all kind of play off each other. So synergy is kind of a new buzzword in brewing, and it's just this concept of having adding 4-MMP to a beer through Mosaic can actually enhance your monoterpene alcohol perception of your beer. So that's something they've actually tested and found. It's just through synergy, having 4-MMP can make it taste like you have more linalool or draniol, for example, even though your levels are exactly the same. It's just those two working together can boost the flavor profile. So that's why I'm a big component of just layering as many of these the fruity compounds that we're after the most, layering those in through whatever process point you can, just to try to increase those into your finished beer, because together I think the more complex and interesting beer you have. So
okay. There's kind of a myth about the freshness, no? Everybody is checking the bottom of the cans, trying to get the latest can New England IPAs or hazy IPAs. Trying to get it. If you can take it directly from the canning machine, you would be happy to do that. Is that the right approach, or do you think? What do you think about maturation or evolution of these hazy IPAs in a short period of time?
Yeah, I think the answer really depends. I think it depends on what the brewers did with that beer before it goes into the can. I think most of our beers, for example, from the day we brew them so like a hazy double IPA, the day we brew it to the day we release it, that beer is about a month old. Okay. So we're doing some of that maturation for the consumer, kind of in the tank. So if a beer is 3 weeks old and it just got dry hopped and it just got canned, I think that beer is going to taste pretty burn, right? It's just very aggressive. Almost tastes like you're drinking actual hops. It just needs time to settle out and kind of chill out a little bit. And so when I was doing some of the research for the book, I interviewed that owns Other Half Brewing, and he said in a perfect world he would let his beers sit a week or two before he would serve, but it's just not practical when you're trying to empty tanks and keep a business running. So the idea that you have to drink an IPA super fresh, I think is still valid and true, but I think that it really depends. I mean, you probably don't want to buy one that's 2 or 3 months old, but if it's a week or two old, that might actually just be hitting its sweet spot.
Okay. And you talk about a month before canning the beer. And are we talking since the last dry hop? What time do you recommend since the last dry hop to the packaging?
So usually we'll dry hop our last dose, and then we'll start crashing the beer about 5 degrees at a time. So that's what I'm not sure what 1 degree is in Celsius, but so each day we'll drop our tank 5 degrees. We'll drop the hops out from the bottom of the cone. The next day we'll drop it again 5 degrees, drop the hops out from the bottom of the cone, and this just kind of helps. Every time you drop your hops from the cone, you kind of encourage everything and that's around the cone to move down, like just to keep moving. So you drop the temperature, encourages hops to fall down, drop them out of the tank, it kind of moves them down, slide around the bottom of the vessel. And so we found that multiple drops, always putting head pressure on the beer when you do it, because you don't want to lose any of your aromatics into your headspace. So we'll do that until we get the beer at 35 degrees, which is about 1 degree Celsius. And then we'll leave it there for about a week before it gets canned. Sometimes it'll be a little quicker than that, because 5 days maybe, because we have to have time to carbonate the beer once it gets down to that temperature. But that's, I'd say about a week would be ideal after you're done dry hopping and crashing your beer out.
Okay. I have a couple of more questions. Then I would like the rest of the participants to add their own questions. But I think in a style of beers where the aspect is so different from what we were used in other styles, I think we should talk a little bit about that. I think we should talk a little bit about haziness and about head retention. How do we achieve this cloudy aspect with a nice head?
Yeah, the hazy. I think one of the most common questions that people that ask me is how do they get their beers hazy or keep them hazy. A lot of times they'll drop clear on them. I just think it's a combination of factors, and they all kind of work together to produce a hazy beer. I think first, it's certain yeast strains are just better at producing hazy beers than others. So it seems more of the English ale strains, these top cropping strains, although they're advertised as being like extremely flocculent strains, they don't seem to produce clear beer when they're in the presence of hop oils. So I think that's one important first step, is just using strains that are known to be more of the haze producers. The other is your grist. Choosing grist high in protein can help with as head retention, like you mentioned. So we like to use about, bill for us is probably we'll use 10% malted wheat, 10% malted naked oats, and 10% chip malt. Chip malt, it's like a Carapils or malt. There's some research that shows if you go too high with malted wheat, for example, you can actually have the opposite effect. It'll start to clear up your beer. It's almost like the proteins are in too many, and they almost like clump up and drop out together. So I think anything over like 40% might have that impact. So we're usually about, like I said, about 10 to 20% malted wheat. And that malted wheat, I think, is just one of those that has the biggest impact on producing hazy beers. The other is just the types of hops used. Mike and I call some of our hops, we have a cheater hop series that we started, right? Cheater hops are the really citrusy, fruity ones. They just seem to produce more haze than others, especially some of the higher total oil ones and the New Zealand ones. Like Galaxy, for example, is a hop that just really seems to impart a lot of haze. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but there is a little bit of research that I've been looking at that might imply that it has something to do with the beta acids. Beta acids might actually cling to polyphenols a little better, or to proteins, I'm sorry. So potentially hops that are really high in beta acids might produce more haze, but that's something that we need to look at a little more. But for most of the hops we're using, like Galaxy, for example, is a relatively high beta acid hop. So there could be some truth to that. So haze, I think, it's just combination of using the right hops, using the right yeast, having the right grain bill. And I think it just naturally happens, and it's a stable thing. So we've never added anything to our beers to increase haze or stabilize it. You know, it's all just from the ingredients and the process.
Okay. And I have my final question, and after that, I would like to give the opportunity to the participants to add their own questions.
Okay.
There's a chapter in the book about cryo hops. How do you use them, and what are the advantages of reducing this vegetable matter of the hops?
Yeah, I love cryo hops. I like to use them a lot. We don't use them hardly at all when it comes to the hot side. So we don't throw them into the whirlpool very often, just because they're so high alpha that, you know, if you're adding them, you can't add as much hop material to your fermenter, which in some cases could be good depending on your system. If you have a vessel that can't handle a lot of, you know, whirlpool hops, for example, I think would be a great use for that. But we pretty much use the recommended, because they so much the vegetable material is removed. It's about what does it take, about 2 hops, I think, to produce cryo. So that's just, they're removing so much of it and leaving the lupulin gland essentially behind, and they're not doing it with a lot of heat. So that means they're preserving some of those more volatile compounds. So I mean, for us and just our experiences, when we use cryo hops, we get just a brighter flavor from the hops. It's a little bit more dank in some ways. That's not always the case with every variety, but it's brighter, touch danker, and just a little more powerful. You know, it just kind of it brings the hops to the forefront a little more. So we use them at the same rate we use T90 hops. So we don't cut it in half when it comes to dry hopping.
Okay.
One of my favorite things to do is to do single hop beers. So using like T90 Mosaic and Mosaic Cryo, and dry hopping with those two, almost even splits. I usually leave the cryo for the last dry hop if I'm doing multiple stages. I like what that brings, because you're using the same hop. You already know Mosaic works well with Mosaic, right? It's the same variety. But when you just get a different flavor from the cryo, so it just makes this a little brighter, a little punchier, and it just melts well with what you get from the T90 version. So we do that quite a bit. So single dry hop Citra pellet and Citra cryo, Mosaic beers that are Mosaic cryo and Mosaic pellet. I like what it brings to the beers, and the complexity it can bring, especially to single hop beers, which I guess it kind of is at that point, but not really. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of the cryo hop. And the other potential added benefit from cryo hops is because so much of that vegetal material is removed. When, you know, heavily dry hop beers have an increase in beer pH. So the more you dry hop a beer, the higher your final pH goes. And they are assuming that that's coming from the vegetal material itself that's raising your pH. So using cryo hops, you can use them in the same amount and probably not raise your beer pH, which in my opinion is a good thing. Some of your hazy IPAs can be close to 5 pH after dry hopping, which is I think too high. I don't have a perfect answer to where your final pH should be, but especially in double IPAs that are 4.8, 4.9 pH, they can get a little harder to drink. They're a little cloying, and they just need to be a little snappier. And so that's why the cryo can help bring that down a little bit, which you could always do with acid or something to your tank. But so that's just another added benefit, I think, of cryo, is a little less pH adjustment.
And I speaking a little bit about what can you have told us what cryo can get into the beer. How about this itch in your throat? Is that related to the vegetable matter? Can we avoid this itchy sensation using cryo?
I don't know if I have a great answer to that. I just think that I think that beers that have that extreme hop burn like that tend to be beers that don't have enough hop side hopping. I think that's part of it. And also it's just maybe they weren't crashed out good enough prior to packaging. Because that really to me is like, I get that when I take, let's say I burp a tank and I pull a sample from the tank after I pull it. There's hops literally in that glass. That's that tickling, that's that hop burn taste. If there's no hops in the glass, I don't really get that taste. And no, cryo itself it doesn't want to fall out of beer as quickly. It stays suspended better than pellet hops. So it's possible that cryo could actually increase that hop burn, I would think, because if it's not crashing out of your beer good enough before you're canning it, you don't have to necessarily see it to taste it. You'll know when you taste it. Like you said, your throat tickles. So I think that's more of a process thing and just trying to really give your beer enough time cold. And then, you have the ability to, before, when you're packaging your beer, to have like an inline filter. So something like a 300 micron filter that can fit inside 2 sight glasses or something like that. That can just help, leave some more hop particulate behind, which can also, I think, probably help with hop burn.
Okay, here we have one question. This one is from Nacho. Is asking about what are the advantages of reducing little by little the temperature after the last dry hop compared to making a more abrupt decrease of the temperature.
Yeah, so partly we do that just because of our process. So we do what's called unit tanking. So that's, we're fermenting in the same vessel that we dry hop in the same vessel. We crash and we carbonate in the same vessel, and then we keg or can in that one fermenter. And so I think it's important to try to get as much of the hop material out of that tank as you can, because you're not transferring to a bright tank. You're not transferring to another tank where you'll leave behind a bunch of hops in the fermenter. You'll give it more time in the bright where more hops can drop out and you're not pulling from the bottom. So I think when you're unit tanking heavily dry hop beers, it's just been our experience and talking to other brewers is that slow stepping nature of dropping it 5 degrees or so a day. Each day dropping from the bottom of the tank, as I was describing earlier, just kind of keep sliding down the tank into the cone. And so that's the reason that we do it. It's that physical movement of the hops, and then the colder temperature that kind of shocks them into falling more. The movement of the hops, colder temperature to encourage them to drop. And so it's just something we've noticed. We get more hops out, a little slightly better yield when we do that. And so it's just more of a, someone else might have a better method, but that just seems to be what's working best for us when it comes to unit tanking hoppy beers.
So the aim or the goal is to try to get as much hops as possible, basically.
Yep, exactly. Just get you're done with those hops. They're sitting at the bottom of your cone. They're not extracting anymore. Let's just get them out. The longer they sit, the more polyphenol pickup you can get. The longer they sit, the worse it is for head retention. The longer they sit, maybe you'll pick up more of those otherwise volatile compounds like myrcene. So once you get what you want with those hops, I think it's just try to get them out of there.
Okay, and doesn't I would think that it's more I don't know, it's more intuitive to think that if you drop the temperature more quickly, the precipitation of the hops are going to be faster. Am I wrong?
You know, it's one of those questions where I wish that we could. I wish our big tanks were was going on in them. You know, but you know, if you drop it at 35, I think you are going to get a hard crash out. You know, I don't know if that's going to collect more on its way to pull out, but it just seems that the slower you go, the more the hops kind of collect on themselves and drop out. So, you know, I don't have a great answer. And like I said, I wish I could actually see what was physically happening in our tanks while we did this to see what was going on. But yeah, I think that would still work. I mean, if you're just going to a hard crash right away, you'll still probably get to where you want to go, but maybe you'll just have a little bit more hops and suspension.
Okay, I can imagine that eventually having one BBT would be another great solution.
Yeah.
Ok, bueno, ya ahora mismo las preguntas que tenemos preparadas o que nos han ido enviando se terminaron, entonces, bueno, es el momento de que si alguno le ha surgido alguna pregunta durante el conversatorio, quiere aprovechar este momento para preguntar algo que no hayamos tratado, pues es el momento de hable ahora o calle para siempre. Entonces, bueno, pues está el chat abierto para que puedan preguntar lo que se les ocurra. We're going to give a couple of minutes to see if we have some other questions.
Okay, sounds good.
They're asking about actually never purging or never taking away the hops. Is that something you would do, or you always would try to eliminate as much matter as possible?
You know, as a home brewer, I would often like dry hop in a keg and leave them in the keg the whole time I was drinking that. And that seemed to work well. And I kind of just theorized that, you know, because that beer was so cold, I mean, those hops just dropped to the bottom and really weren't doing anything at that point. You know, they're in there, but they're not, you know, really extracting because they're not up in the beer. On the more bigger tanks, you know, the commercial size tanks, it's too much of a hassle to have those hops in the tank, I think is the biggest thing. If you don't ever drop the hops out and you have a racking arm, you're probably never going to have that arm above the hops. You know, the hops will be above it, and so you just be pulling from those.
Va a ser complicado luego embarrilar porque
or keg it or whatever, but you know, I think at long-term contact with hops, if they're kept really cold, isn't the end of the world. I used to do it again.
Pues no es el final del mundo, pero es un tema
bigger scale to get them out.
Okay, we have some couple of questions coming in. Finally, people got into it. So they're asking about how to calculate the IBUs when you are using hop stand or dry hop. Is there any formula updated or something we can use to try to get closer to the measured value if we don't have the access or don't have the money to send our beers to the lab?
I guess I can only tell you what I do. And right now I use Beersmiths for all of our recipes. And you know, their formulas probably aren't 100% accurate, but I do find them useful in that I can, you know, set the whirlpool duration. So say I do 30 minutes and I can set the exact temperature too. So we're usually like 30 minutes at 82 degrees Celsius. And then it gives you an estimated IBU number from that. And it kind of goes back to what we we're just talking about with your IBU numbers is I know that if it estimates 50 IBUs from my Whirlpool edition, I know kind of what that tastes like, and I just go from there. But I think trying to at least keep the time that you're whirlpooling or steeping your hops and the duration that you're doing it, that is going to dramatically change your IBU and bitterness level. And there's just like there's a pullback of IBUs at some point. You know, you're not getting like a double IPA. You're throwing a whole bunch of hops at it. There's a pullback of IBUs where you're not summarizing every single one. So the bigger the beer, I think the more hops you can throw at it on the hop side. And I think the more of a benefit you get from it, especially if you're throwing those in a cooled Whirlpool environment. So don't have a great answer other than that, you know, just using the software that's out there, and it's not perfect at the
actually, maybe I shouldn't be telling this because I work for a lab, but if the lab you are using uses an spectrophotometer, that is the more usual tool to calculate the IBUs, the result that you get from some modern or new age hopping techniques are not going to be very, very exact as well. You know, the spectrophotometer are calculated to are designed to search for a wavelength that is usually produced by this isomerization of alpha acids. So you are not going to get a very good measurement either if you are dry hopping and getting your bitterness from other different pathways other than alpha acid isomerization. But
yeah. So dry hopping really just confuses the whole formula, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Continuing with the questions, they're asking about what would be the limits down and up of dry hop, meaning what is the less amount of dry hop that wouldn't be noticed, and the bigger amount of dry hop where you don't really get a difference adding more hops.
Yeah, I might need your help in my typically on let's say a low alcohol hoppy beer. We're still using about 22 pounds of hops for 10 barrel batch.
From 10 bars, so that would be around.
That's probably close to like 8 grams a liter or something.
That's something around that, yes, 8 grams a liter.
Yeah. And so that's the lowest that we'll typically go for dry hops. And you know, there's Thomas Shellhammer's done some research, the saturation point for hops, where you're not getting any more if you use more hops. But we've just found that, you know, that we do get more flavor and aroma when we're adding more, and I think that might have something to do with your vessel size. I think the bigger the vessel, the extraction is hindered a little bit, and you're not getting as good of extraction. I think that plays a pretty big role in what you're getting in your glass. Most of our double IPAs, we essentially double that. So that would be closer to 16 grams a liter, or about 44 pounds. So that's about 4 pounds per barrel in our talk. And we've gone higher than that. And that's where I don't really get much of a added benefit. Sometimes we'll go higher than that just because the hop variety we got just doesn't smell as punchy as it should. And so that's more of a quality of the hop versus, you know, an actual number or quantity of hops we're after. So, you know, sometimes you just have to smell the bag of hops and kind of make a call from there. But so most of our double IPAs and IPAs are at that 16 grams a liter or 4 pounds a barrel mark. And again, if we're using cryo just like we're using T90 in those situations. So I think that can help too. I mean, you can use hops at a lot less and you'll get, you know, different quality from them. And you can use some of your, you know, I would consider dry hopping in higher amounts if I'm doing some active fermentation dry hopping. So, you know, let's say you're dry hopping day 2 or 3 of fermentation, you know, that's going to change the hop character you're getting. It's going to more than likely make it a little less, whatever variety you use could make it a little less green. You're pushing out some of those volatile aromatics through fermentation. It's still a dry hop, but it's not going to be as effective as, you know, a post-fermentation dry hop. It can still make the beer a little more complex, but that might be one situation where I would, my total dry hop amount would be higher if I'm doing active fermentation dry hopping. But as a general rule, that's where we've kind of settled in our hopping amounts.
Okay, I think there's another factor that maybe is different from the US because we are far away from the hop source. So for us, it's a very expensive ingredient. So the economic factor or the money factor is getting into the way very quickly. So I think being very efficient with the dry hops and very efficient with the hop usage is very important for us. So that's why we try to get more out of less.
Yeah, I definitely sympathize with that, and I think that's probably a huge frustration for brewers. They're trying to do hoppy beers. All I could say is, like, you know, I don't think I would be doing a lot of active fermentation dry hopping in that case, because you're going to lose some of the aromatics from it. You know, granted, it still might add something to the beer, but, you know, in terms of just that hit you in the face hop character, I think you'd lose a little bit if you're doing active fermentation. To get the most from your hops, I think you could try to, you know, dry hop in multiple stages. That can help with extraction a little bit. Your efficiency goes up, but you just want to make sure that you're dry hopping in a way that's avoiding any oxygen intake, because, you know, the slightest bit of oxygen in your beer can just hide any of those hoppy aromatics that you're after. We just recently started testing some of ours, and our dissolved oxygen numbers are usually around like 30, 35, 40 parts per billion in tank. And that's after dry hopping and everything. So I think we think that's a pretty good number, and that's, you know, dry hopping in a closed manner. We have one of those dry hop dosers. So that's essentially a vessel that sits on top of your dry hop port with a valve. So we can load that vessel with hops, purge it of CO2, or purge it of oxygen with CO2, bring it to the same pressure as our tank, and then open the valve and drop the hops in without ever opening up the tank at all. I think little things like that can go a long way in trying to get more from your hops. It's just improving your process. And then again, I think agitating, burping those hops once or twice a day is a good way to try to get. Recent research suggests that the higher the alpha acid of the hop, the harder it is to
se ha investigado que entre más
to me, that suggests that, you know, a higher alpha variety might need multiple burps a day versus a lower alpha variety, just to try to get the most that you can from it. So yeah, it's frustrating when the hops are expensive. They're a long ways away. So I get what you're saying. And I think trying to pair hops with more ester-driven yeast can also be a good way to try to push hop aromatics by using less hops. And I think some of these genetically modified strains, if you're comfortable using them, I think that's going to be a huge bonus for international brewers that can help to up their aromatic flavor capabilities without having to just throw a whole bunch of money at hops. So I think that's definitely an area to keep an eye on.
Okay. What would be your typical yield in a 10 BBL batch? How much beer do you get at the end of the process?
Let's see here. If we often will double brew. So we'll brew twice to fill a tank. So that's 20 barrels of beer.
Okay.
And we'll usually get about 15.5 to 16 barrels from it. So what is that, about a 15% loss or so?
So you are losing around 4 barrels, something like that.
Yep, something like that. Yeah, it changes around, all the time.
That would be around 500 liters out of 2,400 liter batch, a double batch.
Yeah, so it's definitely some loss there, but you know, I think it could be worse, and hopefully things like the crashing in increments and can help increase the yield. We usually get an extra keg or two just because we'll use a 300 micron filter when we're kegging. So even though hops are starting to come through, they're getting caught by that filter, and it's, you know, allows you to fill one more half barrel keg, or, you know, I'm sorry, I keep using the wrong terminology for you, but, you know, one more keg out of it just to increase your yield a little bit. I mean,
be a 60-liter keg.
Okay. Yep. So usually that filter allows us to get one more 60-liter keg or so, which makes the price of the filter pay for itself pretty quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Then we have our final question for today. They're asking about first word hop, and if we are getting something at the end of the process out of first word hop, or is kind of useless?
You know, I think what you might be getting in terms of flavor, I don't get a lot from a first wort hop. You know, potentially it's adding a little bit of complexity to your beer, but it's difficult to say for sure. I look at first wort hopping kind of like I like to look at mash hopping. Both of those are introducing, you know, alpha acids to your beer at a very early stage. And alpha acids and beta acids as well can actually complex problematic metals. So metals from the grain itself that can cause oxidation. These alpha acids help to kind of remove those at an early stage so that they're not causing problems down the line. So I think mash hopping and first wort hopping is introducing alpha acids to your beer that could potentially help the shelf life of it. So that's kind of how I look at first wort hopping, not so much as in flavor, but more as in its protective potential.
Okay, I think that's the last question. So I would like to thank you. Pretty much everything we have talked today is in the book. There is so much more information in the book. I think people that have just received the book and haven't had the time and the tranquility to explore through it, because it's a very dense book. It has a lot of information.
You can say boring. That's okay.
No, actually, it's a book you have to go back and forth several times, because all the information are complement or try to complete each other. So
yeah, for sure.
I think it's a good tool to have it at your brewery. It's a good book for writing notes to mark the pages that are more interesting or more relevant for you. I think it's a good book to have near your brew house. So I think it's important to have a paper copy, because having your tablet and your PDF around is not so useful when you're brewing. So I like to thank, me gustaría agradecer a todos los que, bueno, decidieron participar en la experiencia y decidieron compartir con Scott. Espero que les haya resultado interesante, espero que les haya resultado ameno. Como les digo, lo que se ha hablado hoy en un par de horas es muy poquito lo que toca la superficie de toda la información, todo el contenido que hay en el libro. Es un libro para ir para adelante y para atrás, para releerlo, para buscar los capítulos cuando tienes una duda puntual sobre cierto aspecto. Yo creo que está bastante bien estructurado, bastante cómodo la forma de que los capítulos están montados. Y al final, la idea es que sea una herramienta para tener cerca del blog de cocción o cerca de la cervecería, y poder ir adelante atrás, hacer notas y bueno, poder aplicar y poner en práctica todo ese conocimiento que está condensado en el libro, y el inmenso trabajo de investigación que ha hecho Scott, que bueno, si miran el final del libro y revisan las referencias bibliográficas, hay más de 300 referencias bibliográficas, lo cual nos dice pues lo exhaustivo del trabajo de investigación que se ha realizado. Una vez más, darle las gracias por confiar en Libros de Guarda y confiar en bueno, el trabajo que estamos haciendo y lo que queremos compartir. Y bueno, esperamos que hayan disfrutado esta velada, y esperemos que pronto puedan llegar a sus manos más títulos. Estamos trabajando fuerte para poder tener más libros interesantes pronto, hacer lanzamientos. Y bueno, los mantendremos informados, y como digo, thank you very much, Scott, for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone that's bought the book. I hope you enjoy it, and thanks to everyone that worked hard to translate it, and for the breweries that were nice enough to do a collab with me. Dos Dingos, Placebo, and Loris, thank you. I hope that beer is tasting great. And so, yeah, thank you guys, and I hope you enjoy it, and hopefully it inspires some new beers and some new approaches.
Bueno, pues buenas noches, y quedamos en contacto. La sesión se va a grabar, con lo cual pondremos compartirla. La sesión está grabada, con lo cual la compartiremos con ustedes en unos cuantos días para que la puedan ver con más calma. Buenas noches y muchas gracias.